Hello everyone, and welcome to another video from my narrowboat. I'm a kitchen witch and I make ritual recipe spells from this, my tiny galley kitchen. Today I wanted to tell you a few spooky tales of the canals and rivers of the UK because it is Halloween coming up. So I know some of you are here for boat related content, some of you are here for witchy related content, and here the two shall collide because there is some really interesting folklore that connects witches and witchcraft to the rivers and even the canals of the UK, and there's also a myriad of spooky tales connected to the waterways. The last spooky tale on this list is actually something that I experienced firsthand, and I have since been able to figure out an explanation for what happened, like a logical, physical, reasonable explanation for what I saw, because when I first saw it, I could not explain it. Maybe that was me being silly, but let's see if you can guess. But first I'm going to go through some historical spooky tales of folklore and ghost stories that have happened on the waterways of the UK. So the first one is Blissworth Tunnel. Now this is a tunnel that I have been through myself. Let me tell you, it is incredibly creepy. I actually went through this tunnel on my second ever day of boating because when I bought my boat, I'd never actually driven a narrowboat before. I was just kind of winging it, and on day 2 of my journey I was faced with the 45-minute, almost 3-mile long tunnel that is Blissworth. The name does not match the vibes. It's incredibly dark in there. You cannot see the light at the end of the tunnel when you enter the tunnel. You cannot see if another boat is coming. You can't really see anything. Obviously you've got the lights on of your boat, so you can see, but you can't see much. And there's vents in the top of the tunnel, so there's a lot of dripping as well. I think it had rained the night before we went in, so it was incredibly wet. I was already scared and anxious because I'd never done a tunnel before, and it was just so long and so dark, and it really did have creepy vibes. So this tunnel was constructed between 1793 and 1805. But during construction at a place called Butter Vent, there was a collapse. This killed several of the workers, and to this day people report when they go through the tunnel that they often see a splitting off, a forking in the tunnel to a mysterious, spooky tunnel that doesn't actually exist. A ghost tunnel, if you will. And the exact point where people tend to see this apparition is at Butter Vent. Now, one explanation for this is that after the collapse, they actually diverted the original course of the tunnel. So there was a second tunnel that then got closed off. And so is that what people are seeing? Or is it just incredibly dark, incredibly spooky, and people are just kind of seeing things? Many people report feeling uneasy and feeling like they're being watched as they go through the tunnel, and I can attest for that. It doesn't feel very comfortable in there. The second spooky waterway on my list is another place that I've been on my boat. The entirety of the Grand Union Canal has many different ghost stories and spots of unease, but one particular place is a place that I've been through called Cowley Lock. The story goes that a boatman who was trying to save his horse from drowning ended up drowning himself in this area. People report seeing ghostly figures, often accompanied by the sound of a horse whinnying. Many boaters describe a sudden drop in temperature when they pass through the lock. Some people have also claimed that they feel this sense of sadness come over them. I went through this particular lock in daytime. I've been through it a few times on various different boats, my own and friends. I actually really like that stretch. It's really pretty. Just below the lock there's all these trees and moored boats. It's really gorgeous. I haven't been through there at night, and I can imagine that it does feel quite spooky at night. The next tale is a tragedy that occurred on the River Avon in Bath. There have been reports of a spectral boatman seen near Putney Bridge. According to the local legend, this spirit is a boatman who drowned in 1845. He was attempting to rescue passengers during a sudden storm, but drowned in the process. He is said to be seen gliding silently across the river. He's often seen on stormy nights, and those who encounter him often report feeling a strange calm, as if he is there to protect them from the river's dangers. Sorry, I've had to move because that sun was absolutely blinding me, which isn't very spooky. If you could just do me a favour and ignore being able to see like my kitchen roll, so we'll ignore that. Anyway, back to the spookies. Deep within the picturesque Yorkshire Dales lies a stretch of river so serene it almost beckons you to come closer, to dip your toes in its cool, inviting waters. But beneath this surface lies one of nature's deadliest traps. The Strid is a section of the River Wharfe that has claimed countless lives. Though it appears to be a gentle stream, the Strid has a dark reputation, shrouded in folklore and tragedy. I was unsure if I was going to include the Strid because it's obviously not a section of the waterways that boats can traverse. It's not a section of the waterways that anybody should be on in any capacity. And I think within this explanation, you will understand why I just couldn't leave this one out. The Strid is deceptively narrow, where the River Wharfe is forced through a constricted, rocky channel, turning its once wide flow into a torrent of deadly currents. It is basically a huge, wide river on its side. The rocks and the river's swift flow carve deep chasms, so deep that no one knows for sure exactly how far down the river even goes. The danger is not immediately obvious. The surface is deceptively calm, but beneath is an incredibly powerful current, one that is deadly. Perhaps the most famous story surrounding the Strid is that of a young couple, lost to these very waters in 1826. Legend tells of their attempts to cross the river, misjudging the narrow rocks that seem easy enough to leap across. In an instant, they were swept away, pulled beneath, and disappearing without a trace. To this day, many spirits are said to haunt this section of river. Despite its picturesque setting, the Strid remains a deadly enigma. Even today, it continues to claim lives. The dangerous mix of powerful currents, sharp rocks, and sheer drops below the surface make it one of the deadliest stretches of water in the UK. It serves as a reminder of nature's hidden perils and the thin line between beauty and destruction. Another river that I have been on a boat, not this boat, would not be brave enough to do that at all, but I did help a friend last year. Well, I say help. I didn't really help, I kind of stood around. Although I will say, we missed the turning and almost got swept away, and I stayed pretty calm, but I think that had a lot more to do with the fact that it wasn't my boat. I'm sure you can imagine that the River Thames has so many stories. It's probably full of dead bodies, it's definitely haunted, and it still claims lives to this day. But the story that I want to tell you is that of the phantom rowers. The River Thames has always been a river of mystery. With a history stretching back thousands of years, the river has seen its share of joy, tragedy, and bloodshed. But among the most chilling tales are those of the phantom rowers, shadowy figures who glide silently through the fog near Richmond. I've chosen this story because this is the section of river that I went over when I went on a boat. This ghostly legend began in the early 20th century when several people reported seeing spectral figures rowing along the riverbank. Dressed in traditional rowing attire, these apparitions would appear without warning, rowing silently through the mist and then vanishing without a trace. Witnesses described hearing the unmistakable sound of oars cutting through the water, yet when they looked, the river was empty. Many believe that these are the spirits of rowers who tragically drowned in boating accidents, forever bound to the river. The Thames has a long history of boating mishaps. Over the centuries, the river has claimed thousands of lives, and it seems some souls never left it. For those who've encountered these phantom rowers, the experience is unnerving. Some say that they felt a sudden drop in temperature or a sense of sorrow just before the apparitions appeared. Others describe hearing faint voices, snippets of conversation and eerie laughter floating over the treacherous waters. The phantom rowers are just one of the many eerie tales tied to the Thames. From historic drownings to the river's role in wartime tragedies, it's no surprise that ghostly remnants of the past linger in these waters, silent witnesses to the endless cycle of life and death on this ancient river. Another stretch of water that I have chosen is the River Ouse in York. Again, this is another stretch of water that I have been on a boat. Not a narrow boat, just a little motorboat. And this river is no stranger to tragedy. Over the centuries, its waters have claimed countless lives, most notably during times of severe flooding. Yet beyond the natural dangers, there are those who believe that the spirits of those who have drowned still wander its banks. One of the most enduring legends is that of a woman in white, often seen walking alone along the river at night, her face etched with sorrow. She is said to be a woman who drowned from a flood, though no one really knows who she is. Her ghost is often spotted by night fishermen and late-night walkers drifting silently along the water's edge. Throughout history, the River Ouse has served as a vital artery for trade and transportation, but its floods have claimed many lives over the years. I actually lived in York for 2 years, so I'm really familiar with the River Ouse, and it definitely has like a haunting sense about it. It's a lovely place to hang out on a summer's day, but in general I have always thought of it as quite a spooky river. Maybe that's because it's in York, and York is quite well known for hauntings and ghosts, and it just has spooky vibes. There's a reason why I lived there. It is spooky. In fact, one of the most successful shops in York just sells little figurines of ghosts. That's all they sell, and they do so well. I also want to tell you some of the folklore surrounding witches and the canals and waterways. Probably most of you know that during the witch trials, one way that people very logically determined who was a witch and who was not a witch was through putting them in a body of water and seeing if they float or not. Those who floated were witches and condemned to death, and those who sank to the bottom and drowned were not witches, but obviously bit late for the apology. The River Ouse in York, for example, that we've just mentioned, was the site of many executions in the 16th and 17th centuries, and that's probably one of the reasons why it feels particularly eerie on that river. Circling back to the River Thames, there is a stretch of river that comes off the Thames called the River Barking. In the 16th century, a woman named Elizabeth Francis was accused of witchcraft in Barking, near the Thames. Legends suggest that she was executed, and her spirit still haunts the river to this day. There are actually boaters that live on that stretch of river, and I've heard that it's very creepy at night. If you are one of those people who, like me, is very interested in spooky and supernatural and witchy things, you might have heard of the witching hour. The witching hour is usually around dawn or dusk, and is a time when witches would commune with spirits or perform their spells. The witching hour is particularly connected to bodies of water, probably because in the very early morning when the sun first hits the water, there is often fog or mist. It sort of adds to that feeling of the veil being thin. Boatmen and women who worked the canals were extremely superstitious people. They believed that witches could cause mischief on the waterways, causing fog or accidents, and they referred to ghosts as boggarts. Some boaters would perform rituals or carry charms to protect them from the most malevolent witches and spirits. But rivers and bodies of water are also associated with healing. Witches would gather herbs and perform rituals to cure ailments near rivers. They'd also take water from springs. I've also heard that canal locks can often be cursed. I've met many a cursed lock. When locks stop working, they're said to be cursed to prevent boaters from passing. I really enjoy folklore like that. It highlights the intersections between magic, nature, superstition, and navigation of the waterways. Lastly, I will tell you my ghost story. This happened quite a few years ago. I think it was around 2021. My boat was moored near the rowing club on the River Lee, a really busy stretch of water. Lots and lots of boats there. I think it was November, December time. Really cold, really dark, and there was a really heavy fog. You couldn't see anything up or down the river. I was with a couple of friends. We were just coming home to the boat, and out of the mist came this silent boat. We couldn't hear anything. There was no sound of an engine running, nothing. This boat seemed to be almost floating, and it was going backwards. Why could we not hear an engine? Why was it going backwards? And there was no one on it. There was no driver on this boat. It was just moving silently through the mist backwards. And that's what freaked us out the most. It seemed like it was in reverse. It seemed like footage that was being played in reverse. And maybe it was because we were already a little bit spooked because of the mist and the dark, and I don't know, just us being silly. But it looked so ghostly. The fog parted and curled. It was honestly like a movie. And we could not work out what was happening. So I'm going to give you an opportunity to write in the comments what you think happened and what you think the explanation for that is, because there is one. And it's a logical, non-ghostly explanation, I'm afraid. Sorry if that's a disappointment. I'm not sure if I've ever even seen a ghost properly, fully, and I don't want to, so if any ghosts are listening. I've never felt that my boat is haunted, so that's a good thing. So what had actually happened is we had just come down a hill and turned a corner onto the canal. So we'd only been on the canal for, 10 seconds. The reason why we could not hear an engine is that this boat that we saw didn't have an engine. It was being towed by another boat that was further up. Because of the thick fog, I think that sort of dampened the sound, and that's why we couldn't hear the engine of the other boat. That's why there was no driver, and that's why there was no sound of an engine. So not a ghost story, but it felt like one at the time. I am definitely keen to do a lot more witchy content this year. I feel like I've kind of answered everyone's questions about boat life, to be honest, and there's so many amazing boater accounts now, and I don't want to keep answering questions that I've already answered. I know that many of you who are new here are following for the witchy content, so it is coming. Again, let me know in the comments what you'd like to see. If you've joined me from Instagram, you probably are familiar with my kitchen witchery, because that is the main way that I practice my practice, is through food. But here on YouTube, where I have a bit longer to sit down and chat with you and talk about everything witchy, I do want to share some recipes on here. I definitely want to talk about how I sew ritual and intention and ceremony into my day using food, but I also would love to just touch on witchcraft as a whole, the history, my experience with it, my thoughts on it, and yeah, design some recipe spells for you guys. So if you do have anything that you would like to know, have a video topic that you'd like me to cover, I'm open to any suggestions that you have. So thank you again for watching, and I will see you maybe next week. I'm definitely going to try and put out a weekly video from now on, but I'm not making any promises.